of Silicon, the #1 podcast for use in Windows.
If only that were true, we'd be able to retire.
I'm talking about literally making Windows out of the podcast.
Yes. Anyway.
How's it going?
Got him. Welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. Apologies about last week. We had some last-minute issues with the guest. That interview will be coming in February now. More details like at the bottom of the show. Anyway, I'm your host, Adam. Joining me as always, the regular crew. Let's get to the news. Let's see. Pennyfen, you go up first since you have more knee updates.
I saw my knee doctor on Monday and they gave me a different injection. I forget what it's called, but it's like some type of gel. And basically the next step after this, if this doesn't help, is I need to go see a surgeon about having a knee arthroscopy. So that's fun.
Ouch.
And like, depending on what they want to do with that, I could be out for a week or upwards of 6 weeks.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Now that's still 2 months away, so...
Yeah, well, 2 months till I see the doctor, and then I think my insurance can take up to 6 weeks to approve stuff like a knee arthroscopy, so... We have time to get things sorted if we need to.
Certainly.
As far as gaming news goes, I finished Wolfenstein the New Order and its DLC Old Blood. They're pretty alright, but I kind of wish I got them on PC and not PS4. But, well, yeah.
Should be a given, I think.
I mean, I needed to spend my gift card on something, so yeah.
Fair enough.
And
there are a lot of PS4 games that seem really
Spider-Man?
awesome.
I wasn't gonna pay $40 for Spider-Man.
Well, I would.
Yeah, if I had it, maybe.
Sure.
And then I started the new Colossus, and not a big fan of how that one's starting so far. But I'll give it a bit.
I mean, they upped the difficulty because, you spend half the game with half health.
Yeah.
Like, I get that's some gameplay and story integration, but, it doesn't always make for the best experiences.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm probably going to end up turning down the difficulty a little bit because I had it on, like, the one above normal, whatever that one is. I think it's, like, Bring It On. So, like, if I had a keyboard and mouse, I could probably do it, but with a controller, I'm probably going to have to step it back. And, new content dropped for Final Fantasy XIV. It's pretty good, though it sucks they split the story in half, because I want to see how this shit ends.
I used to be addicted.
So how awkward is it to use a blue mage when they don't let you, queue automatically for anything?
You get most of your experience in the overworld fighting mobs out there instead of in dungeons. And yeah,
I guess that makes sense.
I also, speaking of Blue Mage, I've been trying that out. It's alright. I wish they did some updates to make it easier to tell, what monsters give you stuff. Like, not necessarily tell you...
You're not a walking Final Fantasy encyclopedia that knows exactly what monsters should give you everything?
I wish. Like, if I know what spells I'm looking for, I know what monsters to seek out. The problem is, what spells can I get? Because the spell book's basically grayed out. Until you actually get the spell, which... So yeah, I might mess with that in the post-show. And I think that's it from me.
Right. So moving on, Golix, you're up.
Not a whole lot going on interesting here. Mostly been still playing Smash and stuff when I have time. I was actually in a one of the Let's Play channels I do followed had a online Smash tournament with the preliminaries yesterday, so I entered that. I didn't expect to win any, and I didn't, but you know, it was a round robin format, so I at least got to play with other people.
Yeah.
I have a hard time since I don't have many real life friends with games, so.
Yeah, I might get a Switch someday.
Well, also the internet connection isn't super great.
Yeah. Hopefully by
here,
the
and
time I
also-
get a Switch, the online connectivity will be better on Switch,
Yeah, and
seeing how you're paying
Smash-
for it now.
Yeah, Smash is a little laggy anyway. And just also like because I can't play on the TV a lot. Okay, there are like 4 separate reasons why I can't actually do the thing where they suggest getting a USB to Ethernet thing and like hard playing it that way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, since you
wonder
have
if
2
they'll-
monitors, worst case, you could always just take your Switch and plug it into one of your monitors.
Okay, well, the first
Yeah.
problem is that our Ethernet router is full of out cables.
Ah.
That's a problem.
That's the first step. The second step is it would be tricky to get a wire from there to either the TV or my computer.
Honestly, that's the easiest part.
Mhm. I didn't say they were all equally big. And second would be I would have probably either have to hook it up to my TV or figure out how to hook it up to my computer.
Yeah, as long as your computer has HDMI, it should be fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
And it's something you can
My
look at
monitors
someday.
aren't exactly new, so yeah, I need a new monitor anyway. One of my monitors doesn't turn off reliably.
Hey, that's not good.
That's terrible.
I've just been unplugging it at night when it won't turn off.
I mean, it works.
Yeah.
Insert joke about sale at Best Buy.
Black Friday just passed.
Yeah, I think that is actually pretty much where I got this one. I mean, it's also like more than 5 years old, so. Anyway, I don't have much else interesting going on, so next person.
Well, that'd be Twilight.
Okay. Well, there's been 2 more mudslides since the last show we had.
Jesus.
Yeah. Thankfully, they weren't in the way of the road home, like the last one. Well, like the one before those last 2 was. However, these 2 happened in the same place on the main road going to town. Thankfully, there's a way around that road. There is one to go around on my road to go home on, but that's like a 2-hour drive, so that would never work out. Yeah, you have to go into another county, then find the right way through there. And it's been
That
years
sounds
since
like a
I've
pain.
been on that road. It's been years since I've been on that particular road. Anyway, besides those 2, one of my neighbors, a friend of my mother's, who's in the business of, well, her daughter is in the business, is a real estate agent, and she's offered me a house that I could have possibly moved into, my own house. And it looks like it'd be an alright place to live, just it needs some work done on it. The floor just needs sanding and new paint, and I think the bathroom commode needs replacing. It's about $32,000, but it's not too bad, honestly.
That's like a house.
Yeah, it's a house.
Not bad.
Only enough for one person, of course, which is enough for me. Yeah. I was still thinking about it. I might take it. Have to talk to the bank about it first, but I have to wait and see how it works out. There's like one other person who's eyeing it. Apparently, he's a big business guy who's been buying out properties
A flipper?
or renting out. Huh?
A flipper? Somebody who just takes old houses, fixes them up, and sells them again?
Yeah, that's from the sounds of it. He already owns his own big business, so I don't see why
Either
he's
that or
enter to.
you're about to enter a 1990s family-friendly comedy.
Why not both?
Well, I have to wait and see. Anyway, besides that, haven't really done much in terms of gaming. I think I'm getting burnt out on my road to preparing for Kingdom Hearts 3. I haven't played that in a while.
This is why I started early, so I could space it out.
Yeah. Anyway, I did play the remake for the Resident Evil 2 demo. I like what I've played of it. I did both the PC version and the PS4 version, and I'd be alright with either version. I'm still thinking about it though. I also did get in on that God Eater 3 demo as well. It's pretty much like the previous two.
Yeah, I wanted to, but I didn't have the money for PlayStation Plus.
Yeah. It's roughly the same thing, but I have to wait to see how the full game is. Well, that's enough for me. On to you, Adam.
Indeed. Well, let's see. Had to get a TV tray replaced. Like the one I use for my laptop got a big crack in it. I think just from wear and tear. That was the thing. Just a bunch of replacing some minor items. Like had to get a new long sleeve sweatshirt because it's been cold. Like
Cold in Florida? Coward.
Well, it's a reminder that I live in the temperate zone of Florida.
Yeah, but it still doesn't get that cold.
No, well, it's cold around here, like the 40s and the 30s.
Yeah, it's been in the teens here.
Meanwhile, if you see snow, it's the sign of the apocalypse.
Yeah, it's like it's still cold enough where you need warm shit.
Yes, it's cold enough that you can't wear shorts.
Shucks.
You can still wear
It's like,
shorts.
unless we're
Yeah,
talking
you can
about
totally still wear shorts.
I'm like, it depends on the day. Like Sundays you can actually still wear shorts. Other days not so much.
We lived in Florida for like 18 years, and it never gets cold there.
Well, we were in South Florida, to be fair,
That
so
could
it's
be
a little
fair.
bit warmer.
Yeah, I'm in
But it's
like north central Florida, so
It can get cold there, yeah.
it could technically snow, right? It's pretty rare though.
like last time it snowed here was like the 70s.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people were like thinking it was the end of days.
Possibly.
People weren't as dramatic back then, honestly.
Fair
They
enough.
probably were. It's just, there wasn't a social media network to pick up on such things.
Good point.
But anyway, that's about it for me this week. Yet not a lot happened. Like, that's not a bad thing, honestly. Anyway, so merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And this week we have Anthony and Michael Berlin of Deep Dive Interactive.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for having us.
No problem, no problem. Thanks for accepting my invite on such short notice.
Sure.
Anyway, so how we like to get things started is by asking the people behind the game what got them interested in video games in the first place, both on a personal and a professional level.
You want to go first?
Sure. Well, I mean, we're twins. I should start by
Yeah.
saying we're 30 years old, so we've pretty much had video games around our entire lives. Like as far back as I can remember, our older brother at least had a Nintendo and a Super Nintendo that we were playing games on. I remember having a. You remember these little like novelty watches you could get, like how they had the calculator watch and stuff like that. I had one that had Star Fox on it, which I thought was the coolest thing ever at the time, and still do, in fact, for being totally honest. And yeah, we just loved games forever. We played consoles for a long time, and then when we were maybe 13 or so, we got into PC gaming and playing MMOs, and then sort of went back and
Good old
forth between
tibia.
the two. Yeah, and then sort of went back and forth between the two, and it's just been a staple of our lives for as long as we've been alive, basically. Like there's never been a time where we haven't had some games that we either enjoyed playing or were looking forward to playing, as far as I can say anyway.
Yeah, same. Like definitely since we were just, I don't know, probably like as far as my memory goes back, I remember playing video games like Super Mario and like Donkey Kong and Crash Bandicoot and like I'd say
Power
probably
Rangers.
yeah, Power Rangers, all the Tekkens, all the Power Rangers fighting game, the Ninja
the
Turtles
brawlers.
fighting game.
Yeah, the side scrollers.
Yeah, all those like side-scrolling games and stuff like that. And yeah, once we got into like I'd say like middle school down in Florida, we started playing like MMOs, like he said, and ever since then, pretty much just always been into gaming. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I personally started getting into like development of games. Well, I guess it was a little bit before that if you count like testing and stuff like that. Like in around 2009, 2010, like alphas started coming out as like released games. So I started like getting those, and some of the ones that I started working on, like I don't know if anyone knows this game, Mortal Online. I tested for them for a little while and got like a kind of like a inside edition sort of like or inside scoop or whatever you want to call it to like how video games are made and stuff like that. And then about 4 years ago, I don't know if any of you guys know Arma Life servers, but me and my friends got our hands on the Arma Life server code from a friend of ours, and we started making a Arma Life server, and that became incredibly popular. And then we started working towards making an actual game, and then that one didn't pan out for me anyway. And so I stopped working on that. And then about 2.5 years after that, my brother started getting interested in video game development and wanting to learn how to do coding and stuff like that. And I had already started learning how to do 3D modeling like about 4 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago now. And yeah, and since he started making a game, then I started working on getting back into making 3D models. And over the last about year and a half now, we've been working together on Vengeful. He made Inescapable with a friend of ours from work.
Yeah, I had always had a hobbyist background in all the like creative pursuits, like music being the one I've spent the least time on. I'm garbage at it, but I've done a lot of like graphic design and web design and animation and stuff like that back in the Flash days.
No.
And so I've had all these sort of little hobbies that I thought one day I'll take all of those, I'll combine them into something, which is basically what game development is. So about 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, we were at work. We were working together, and a friend of ours was with us. And we decided we would download Unity, basically, see what we could do, try to make something in VR because we all had Vives and we loved it. And that's what got us started. We started making that Inescapable game, where it was just me and our other friend. And then after that came out, a few months later, I started working on Vengeful, and my brother here was interested in working with us, and we just hit the ground running.
You know,
Interesting. I suppose we should talk a bit about Inescapable VR first.
Sure.
Let's see. I believe we have a trailer for that. Betty?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
There it is.
All right.
I see something.
It's there. I
1
recognize
second, let me.
that stock water intro anywhere.
All All right. Do we want audio for this?
Yes, we do.
Alrighty. Okay, that's not muted. All the buttons.
Yes.
All
Fortunately, we
right.
have to give this stuff up live.
Yeah, managing PC audio is a nightmare.
All right.
All right.
What a masterpiece.
Indeed. So, for the
That song is
uninitiated,
still my jam, I should say.
That song is. I just want to point out that song was incredibly inappropriate. It was like
Fire.
way more dramatic than it
Nope.
needed to be.
Like you're in a fight for your life. All right,
And
you have
it-
1 hour.
There's not a. It's not necessarily a fight when you're dealing
Fighting
with
against yourself.
papers. You're fighting against papers. Is that what you're
Yeah.
telling me? The papers are going to kill you? All
a
the
fight-
the
Have
globe.
Have you
Fight
ever had a
against
nasty
yourself is
paper
the
cut?
It was
I
the
don't think
globe.
he has.
That I see now. The globe was a robot, right? Was that?
Yep. it's a
I never
mech.
played his game. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
That's the supportive family right there.
I have two brothers myself. I know how that goes. Anyway, so for the uninitiated, exactly what is Inescapable VR Underground?
It's an escape room. I guess it's a game. But some people call it a simulation because it's really meant to be very much like an actual escape room. It's not overly simplified or anything. It's actually really hard. A lot of people have had a lot of trouble completing it. Most people take at least 2 tries to get it done. And it was pretty much our foray into game development because we figured it would be a really simple sort of project to get our bearings. You know, there's not really NPCs or anything crazy. There's not much in the way of AI. It's pretty much just a room full of props that do things when you interact with them correctly, and then it lets you do the next thing. So it was meant to be the first in a series, but once it was finished, I started working on Vengeful rights and prototyping like the combat, and I was like, I got this. So I jumped right into that.
Well, I suppose the question that Bear's asking in relation to Vengeful Rights is, what sort of lessons did you learn on Inescapable that you applied to the current game?
Basically, everything. I mean, that was the first game I'd ever made. So I had no idea what I was doing before making that game. So pretty much the game, I should say, while functional and bug-free to my knowledge, is spaghetti code out the ass. Like, I had no idea what I was doing when I was making that game. And I learned a lot as far as being more organized with my code and how to make some of the interactions that I was going for feel pretty lifelike, which is a major factor in how Vengeful Rights plays. But
Yeah, for both of us, making all of our systems are designed in a way that we really want it to feel like you're there. We don't want it to feel like you're playing a game. So all of the systems that we've created, or I should say he's created, I've helped design, are all based from the ground up for VR to try to simulate real world mechanics as best we can with the limitations that we have in VR.
Yeah, without bashing any games in particular, there are some games we've played, adventure games, for example, where you press a button to switch through your inventory items, like, you press a button on the trackpad and it takes out your sword or it takes out your bow and things like that. And that kind of thing we feel is a huge disservice to what VR is supposed to be. You know, VR in our minds, you should feel like you're there, kind of the way Onward does it, where you have or pretty much any shooter at this point, you have like physical objects you can interact with that are on your body, that you know where they are, and everything is done basically through natural, like intuitive gestures, not so much trying to remember an interface. So we focused on that. That's why you have a sword on your hip, you have a bow on your back, a backpack over your shoulder. You know, the same thing when you grab an arrow from your quiver. It's all realistic movements that you would expect to do that really use what VR offers opposed to other mediums.
Granted, that's a specific kind of VR. You know,
Fair. Yeah, it's the room scale thing. That's when we think of VR, for us, it's synonymous with the room scale experience and a physical interaction.
Yeah, Ready Player One style VR is what we consider VR.
Yeah, as close as we can get to it anyway.
I get that. I mean, and before we move on to Vengeful Rights properly, I do want to. You mentioned that you dropped the Inescapable series for it, but does that mean it's dead, or it's just you're busy with this project and this is on hold?
Pretty much we're busy with this project. I wouldn't say that I'll never make another Inescapable game. That's just
at this point we could pump out an Inescapable game in about like a month and a half to 2 months probably. So like for us to like keep going with that would be good, but we see the want and kind of need for good adventure games in VR more than basically like small little
there's
experience.
A million escape room games.
There needs to be more 12 to 20 to 30 hour games in VR, something that people can really dive into and feel like they're in it for a long period of time, feel like they're that character that they're playing. And that's a lot of games don't seem to be providing that experience as much. Most of the games that I've noticed, especially the ones that are more popular in VR, are kind of like, just small little experiences, maybe about an hour and a half to 2 hours long, or maybe even shorter than that, but with just replayability content sort of thing. So it's like,
or multiplayer,
exactly. So with Inescapable, we think that we could easily make them now with the expertise that we've garnished over the last 2 years now. And so we, again, like I said, we're more interested in creating something that, one, we're really interested in playing, and two, something that is kind of not as proliferated in the VR space as we'd like to see it.
Yeah.
So before we continue onwards, we've also got a trailer for Vengeful Rights here.
It actually has 2 trailers. You want me to play both of them?
Sure, why not?
Alright.
I'll say the second one is, I wouldn't say completely outdated, but the first one is definitely the most recent one that shows more of what the game's actually like.
Right.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that was the release trailer.
Alright. I think I'm ready.
In a world overrun by goblins and monsters, where the Seraphim, mankind's protectors, are all but gone, one hero must step forward to protect the people and put a stop to the evil Dragor. This fall, put your skills to the test with epic swordplay, skillful archery, and powerful magic. Overcome enormous foes and solve puzzles while becoming stronger in your quest. Focus on the skill set of your choice as you fight to survive. Vengeful Rights.
Didn't make that date.
Right then. So this may sound a little weird at first, but when I see things like Vengeful Rights here, I actually see kind of the promise delivered on motion controls. And
No, I agree completely with that.
because
That's what we were going for, yeah.
because I remember, like, what was it, over 10 years ago, with the
PlayStation
Wii.
Move.
Yeah,
Oh, and the Wii, yeah.
the Wii, it was promising all these kind of things. Swing a sword and use magic, and that's the kind of stuff you can actually do with the room scale. I'm not sure what they call those things, like the motion controlled joysticks or whatever.
You talking about like the treadmills, like the Omni and stuff like that?
No, you just mean the general controllers, like the Vive ones, or the
the
base station setup?
Yeah, the Trek motion controllers.
Right. Oh, is it base station, like just Steam VR, Open VR?
Well, yeah, Vive ones or Rift's touch controllers or the Window Mixed Reality ones.
Yeah,
it's just called room scale, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just motion controls. I think they just stuck with that.
Yeah, it's
or
like
tracked controllers.
It's like this is kind of the next evolution of that particular path.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a very specific path, a very, and I think the reason why a lot of VR developers stick to shorter experiences, well, it's so it can be on like the PlayStation VR, which doesn't allow for room scale,
right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also because room scale VR tech is pretty expensive and cumbersome, and motion sickness. Like
motion sickness is probably the biggest factor, I think. Like I think a lot of well, I think a good amount of people get motion sick.
Right.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of game. A game like ours, you could get motion sickness if you try to use the sliding locomotion, but we offer teleport, and I've never heard of anyone getting motion sickness if they use teleport and room scale. Like it's only when you feel like you're being moved without actually moving that it happens to people.
Yeah, teleporting is a very popular workaround to combat the motion sickness.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's really honestly like, well, I think Skyrim has that one where it's kind of like makes it like foggy sort of thing.
It gives you the vignette around the thing if you want to try to use sliding locomotion. I'm not really a fan of it.
People say it works though. People say that it's a good system for limiting motion sickness, but I think teleporting is probably just the best for people.
Yeah, teleporting has no chance of you getting motion sick. The vignette could help, but it's not going to alleviate it 100% for people who are prone to it.
Yeah, and we 100% knew that going in too. So that's kind of like, you're right. That's what makes room scale more niche than anything. And what really hurts it is the fact that a lot of people don't make the options, like don't take the time to add all the options for somebody to make it comfortable for themselves.
But what if you get teleporting sick?
Have you? I've never heard of anyone getting teleporting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a theory.
Okay.
It doesn't hold up because it doesn't actually happen when you teleport, especially depending on if you have the options for it. You don't see any sort of motion whatsoever. Some people, like in our game, we allow you to have it where it'll fade to black when you do it and then fade back in or not. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So
okay, yeah, I guess if it fades to black, that works.
Yeah, you have options. And that, like my brother was saying, that's kind of a main thing. Like some people that suffer from motion sickness, a lot of the games they're playing don't take the time to incorporate all the options, which is kind of a pain in the ass, to be fair, as a developer, to try to accommodate everybody. But it's necessary, and it's really not that much additional work to get it done. Once it's in, you know.
I've just always been a little bit concerned about VR because I get headaches really easily.
Really?
Yeah. Well, some of the lenses can definitely give people headaches very easily. So
by default, they don't usually do it that much, but you do have to sort of set it for yourself. Like if there's IPD adjustments you can do, and if you have it set to the wrong setting, it could mess with you over time. Or some people like to do mods where they swap out lenses from other headsets that don't belong there. Like a lot of people have taken the Gear VR lenses and tried to put them on the Vive because they're clearer and they don't have these ridges where you can see like streaks and God rays, but they're not designed to work with the Vive screens properly. So they do that and then they suffer barrel distortion and they get headaches and migraines and stuff like that. So it's really not worth it in the long run.
Right. And another thing that should be mentioned is this game is designed for the ground up in VR.
Yeah, 100%.
Like
110%.
You know, something like Skyrim, which was not made for VR.
Right.
You know, that's got its own set of clutches and problems.
Well, anytime in my experience, anytime a game is ported to a medium that it wasn't designed for, it's usually a pretty lackluster experience.
Although Skyrim is pretty amazing, to be fair.
Yeah,
a lot of that comes from mod support, though. People have made it a lot better than it was by itself.
Well, that's typical of Bethesda, though.
Yeah, release it and let other people fix it.
That's right.
Unless it's Fallout 76, but...
Well, that's because they don't roll out mod support. That's the only reason.
Well, not the only reason, but...
I think. Oh, well, what I mean to say is, I think it would probably be fixed by now if they did.
Well, it's because it's a persistent online world, so they really can't allow for mod support.
Yeah, depending on the mod, anyway. Nothing that would affect gameplay.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, in terms of like the actual VR helmets, do you have a preference? Does this game have a preference, like between the Vive or the Oculus Rift?
The game's pretty agnostic between the headsets. They both work pretty much in perfect parity. They have a couple of minor changes to the control settings, but for the most part, they're identical experiences. The only one that isn't necessarily is Windows Mixed Reality, because we have certain things in the game where you reach behind your back, or when you're aiming a bow and arrow, you might want to pull the string all the way back to like behind your ear. And the tracking on Windows Mixed Reality isn't great for controllers when you're doing that. Yeah. But for the Vive and the Rift, it's pretty much the exact same experience.
Yeah, there's really no difference between the two. The only difference, and it's not, I think it was a bug that somebody was having actually, so it's not even a difference actually. But it's the tracking on the Rift isn't always as good. Sometimes the tracking is a little bit more intermittent because multiple reasons.
Yeah. Or it requires additional hardware. Some people pick up a third camera for it to try to create a Vive level tracking situation, but it's still not always as good, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Gotta admit, I don't know much about the Windows one, since not a lot of people talk about it.
No, nobody really talks about it. It's not a bad headset
really
by any means, though.
No, there's a few of them, and they're great options, and they're a lot cheaper than the other ones. And like you were saying, as far as the cumbersome setup of room scale, they don't have that problem at all because there's no outside sensors or trackers. You literally just plug it in, and it does it all from the headset.
So it's not bad, but it's not as good because of the lack of ability to track.
Yeah, there's some trade-offs there, but it's worthwhile for most people.
We'll see how these new headsets, the new wireless headsets from Rift and Vive, work out. I think Rift. I don't know. I'm a Vive fan for the most part. Like, I prefer Vive. I think Vive will probably pull it out where they'll have like pretty good tracking in just a headset and controllers.
I think it'll be the same between the two of them.
Hard to say.
Certainly possible. I mean, on that note, have like HTC and/or Oculus ever approached you about your game?
No. Our game is way too small for them to even know about it, I think. Certainly Oculus doesn't. If they had, we'd probably have to shut them down if they tried to do some sort of exclusivity deal like they like to do.
Yeah, but, I'm not about that at all.
No.
And then, realistically, like, being only two of us and being relatively new game developers, not having much of a following at all in the industry, like we don't have much clout, as it were, right? So like our game, pretty much the only thing, like the only coverage or exposure that we get for the game is pretty much either us going and trying to talk about it with people, or people who have bought the game just word of mouth talking about it.
And of course, YouTubers. And,
YouTubers and
Upload VR's done a couple of small article things.
Yeah, and those are just, Upload VR is great for VR content and stuff like that, but it's still a relatively small news website. So I doubt some of these bigger companies like Vive or Oculus really utilize them as much as they should or could.
It's possible. Like,
They may.
admittedly, VR is not a realm we explore all that often because, well, it is pretty cordoned off, just due to its various factors. But
Yeah, it's still a very small percentage of the market. Definitely. I think it's like 1% right now. Maybe it went up to 2% this year of people on Steam actually have VR headsets.
something like that. And, truth be told, if we want to talk about who's quote unquote leading VR, it's PlayStation. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't know. That's been my belief this whole time too. But I recently saw something that said apparently PC VR has overtaken it, and that they're picking up more speed. But it's pretty neck and neck. It's like there's about 2 million PC VR headsets and 2 million PSVR headsets, but PSVR started way ahead when it came out, and then PC's been catching up and picking up some steam.
PSVR's main thing, I think, is its price point. It's very affordable and it's very easy to set up.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about having a game working with your system because you're running an old graphics card or something. It's just it's made for the platform. You plug it in, you're good to go.
Or driver updates, borks your Vive stuff or whatever.
Yeah, any of the usual PC technical hurdles that people have to deal with.
Yeah, you can be sure Sony's going to be a solid company for delivering any kind of like patching update or anything like that. Like they're pretty good with customer service.
Well, I think they've actually finally gotten some games that are actually worthwhile for their VR headset, like in the Tetris Effect and Astrobot and the like.
Astrobot looks amazing. Yeah, they finally got Beat Saber too, and they've had Skyrim before anyone.
So, it's still good that at least one of the big three is invested in VR.
Yeah.
So
I was really surprised Xbox didn't get in on it.
Microsoft just doesn't really seem to care about VR for whatever reason.
I wouldn't be shocked if it comes eventually, but they probably need to get their the mixed reality stuff out of its infancy first.
Yeah, I think that's the way they're going to go.
It might come pack in with the it might come packed in with the next Xbox, whatever that is.
Possibly, like they seem to be content in having compatibility with the Oculus Rift, if I'm recalling correctly. Like, they made the Xbox One controller compatible with that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that was the extent of their collaboration there, though. I haven't heard anything in 2.5 years now since the Rift came out of them working together at all in any other capacity.
Indeed. I mean, and it's like their big investiture is in AR, which is a whole other subject.
Yeah.
Completely, yeah, exactly.
But really cool.
Yes. Anyway, so I suppose we should talk about like the game itself.
Sure.
What is the story? What is the world of Vengeful Rites?
So it's a fantasy world. It's a completely made up world where we have it's basically like think around medieval, like
standard fantasy fare.
Yeah, standard like medieval era, or at least like somewhat medieval era, where there was like a large magical presence, and that presence is now faded, and it's due to a number of reasons. One being war, another being like deception and like misunderstanding, and a bunch of other little things like that. So the world is kind of in a lull, so to speak, and the game starts off where the lull is disturbed, where basically evil is reintroduced to the world. It's been going nice and relaxing, and now the world is reintroduced to like evil and demons and goblins and all of this. So it's up to you to basically vanquish the evil from the world.
Yeah, you play as the latest in a long line of apprentices of a faction called the Seraphim Brotherhood, which is pretty much just a force of magical warriors. Think like battle mages, and they've been almost exclusively wiped out with the exception of you and your master Abaddon, who early on in the game is murdered, and you find out that he was murdered by Dragor, who's the main antagonist of the game and a former member of the Seraphim Brotherhood, and it falls to you basically to gain strength and become powerful enough to defeat him before he manages to re-lead a new army back into the world to try to take over mankind.
Real classic coming of age story.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it. And I suppose I should ask about the you that you are playing as.
Mm-hmm.
Is it are you a blank slate or are you an actual like character with a backstory?
No, you're pretty much a blank slate in this situation. You're kind of like a Link sort of hero, like nameless, voiceless. It's just because again, being VR, we try to incorporate the idea of you are you in this world. You're not, taking over the role of somebody else. This is just your experience there.
Right.
So are you trying to do anything particularly original with the setting of the story, or is it mostly just original because you're trying to do it better in VR than it's been done before?
There's a couple of things original in the story. We took inspiration from a lot of games that we loved as kids and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, but there's certain things in the story that are specific to our story that aren't in many other games.
Yeah, there are twists and turns that you'll be exposed to. You'll find out it's not quite as black and white as you think. Good versus evil. There's a bit of a gray area there, and but for the most part, it is our way of introducing it to VR and expanding on it. It's mostly the mechanics that'll set it apart. The story I think is good, but it hasn't been fleshed out actually in the game experience yet. It's something we're working on incorporating now. But the main thing that sets it apart is the mechanics.
Right. And in terms of the actual mechanics, like how in depth is the sword swinging and all of the spell casting? Like, do you use hand gestures to cast the spells, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So one of the main shortcomings in sword combat in a lot of VR games is that there's what's called waggling, which is kind of what you could do on the Wii, where you pretty much just flick your wrist back and forth, holding your hand forward, and you kill things because your sword's touching them, so eventually they die. And it's very much garbage, and everybody hates it, and we definitely hated it. So when we went into it, we went in with the idea of, one, that has to be disallowed completely. It can't work at all. So it doesn't. There's a minimum speed and distance threshold that you have to meet for your weapon to actually deal damage, otherwise it won't hurt the enemy. And the other main thing is we wanted to have an emphasis on defending yourself, because most fights are a give and take of, dancing back and forth between offense and defense. So a huge portion of the game, of the combat especially, is defending yourself with either your magical shield that you can summon, or parrying incoming attacks with your sword, or just blasting things away with telekinesis. So if you do try to go in and just swing like a madman and think, oh, it's a game, it's not a real fight, you're going to die. It's basically guaranteed. You have to defend yourself or you're done.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to hand gestures and stuff like that, that's how all of our magic works. So every magic spell is performed with a specific type of hand gesture. Some of the hand gestures are reused, so that way we don't have to.
You don't have to memorize 20 different gestures.
Yeah. You don't have to draw a fire sign or anything like that. It's much more simple. Basically, most of them are pretty much just two-step. It's put your hand here, then put your hand in this direction, or something of that nature.
Or twist the controller.
It's mostly just like a very simple gesture that is very. Once you learn the gesture, it's quick and easy to remember. It's never.
And they're
a problem.
super intuitive. Like to summon a shield, you squeeze the trigger and then you just twist your hand outward, and then it's kind of like a Doctor Strange situation where you, like, if you picture what he does in the movies, that's how you summon the shield in our game. Or to throw a fireball, you throw like you're throwing a ball. To blast a wave of kinetic energy out, you bring your hand to your chest, thrust it forward, release the trigger, and it creates the wave. It's all stuff that you would imagine yourself to do in that situation anyway.
Yeah.
Do you have to hold a specific button or have spell casting equipped in order to not accidentally cast spells while you're trying to sort things?
So the way that it works is you can squeeze the grip button, and it brings up a little magical selection interface that has the 4 disciplines that we have. and then you select whichever one you want. And then while that's like that, you can squeeze the trigger and you can cast however many spells you want from that discipline as long as you have mana. But if you have a sword or something in your hand, it won't work because you have something in your hand. But it's pretty easy to not accidentally cast a spell in the game. And you could always just deselect the school assigned to that hand and you won't be able to cast a spell.
Right.
Yeah, so you always have full control over when you're going to cast or not.
And are such things hard to calibrate? Or
well, we have a calibration system that you go through. It's a very quick 3-step process when you first load into the game, where you put your controller to your chest, you stand in a T pose, and then you put the controller basically to your belt buckle. And with that, we know where specific things are on your body that we can calibrate to. And then most of the gestures are very simple. It's either bring it to your chest, so we know where that is, and then thrust out, and we just track distance and stuff like that, or rotations. It's really nothing that's it's pretty much impossible for it to fail. It'll know for sure what you're doing because it's such a simple check for the system to do.
Yeah.
And in terms of development, this game is in early access.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 currently available.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
How many more chapters are going to be available, and where is development currently?
So we have plans for 3 more chapters. All will be available within the early access. We'll release the game completely when the final chapter's in and the entire game's bug free and ready to go.
It's not there's no DLC or anything like that.
Yeah, we won't have any of that. We'll just make another game basically. And so it should be 4 chapters in total, ranging from anywhere from 12 to 16 hours worth of gameplay. We're going to try our best to keep each chapter around the same amount of time, where it's about like 4 hours of playtime, 3 to 4 hours of playtime. And so currently we're done planning. We have a rough plan for the entire game, like an overarching story, an overarching theme, the main locations that things are going to take place in. We have all of those things ironed out. Now what we're doing after this first chapter, we learned a lot on how to plan things out, so that way we can effectively plan out the coming chapters. And so over the last, due to the holidays and we just moved and all that, we've been taking
release
yeah,
things that come along with that, bug fixes, and
over the last like 4 and a half months, 4 or 5 months, we've gone through a lot of changes in our lives, as well as in the game, and just getting the game out and stuff like that. So we took a little bit of a break during the holidays, but now after the new year, we've been hitting it pretty hard. And I'd say we're on track, hopefully, to get the next chapter out in I'd say being realistic, maybe 6 months.
No, I think realistic.
That might be
more realistic. It'll be out by then, but I think we should have it out much earlier than that. We have the whole chapter planned out now. We're in the process of creating assets for it. We're working on some of the new enemies and stuff. But actually building the stuff doesn't really take that long. It's just making all the set pieces and getting the AI where we want it. I think reasonable would be more like 4 months to have the next chapter out.
I just always err on this side of caution.
It's better to do that because we've been wrong every time before we've announced release dates. So it's probably better to overshoot and then deliver earlier.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be out in a year, 3 months later.
Yeah. We're shooting for 2021.
Surprise, motherfucker. Yeah. But like he said, we're in the process now of creating assets for the new chapter. We have it all planned out. We have all the details planned out. We have a rough map drawn up, things like that. Like that's kind of our process, is where we'll have maybe like several meetings where we just sit there and brainstorm ideas and talk about like what would be cool, what would be a cool situation in this area, what would be a cool kind of like atmosphere, what would be a cool boss fight for this
how
area.
do we incorporate the mechanics or the new mechanics that we've introduced here?
that's something that's very big in for us is trying to emulate like Zelda or Soul Reaver or any of these games that we grew up playing, where you have these abilities, and to keep progressing, you have to use your abilities effectively. So you have to like actually learn your abilities to know what they're capable of, sort of idea. So we want people to we want the game to have that. So we're going to have a lot of things like platforming, because we have climbing in the game. So platforming is a big part of our game, where we want to have like, you got to climb over here to find a hidden thing or stuff like that. And we already have stuff like that in the game currently.
Yeah, we have several smaller puzzles like that where you sort of combine the platforming with the telekinesis ability in the game, for example. So you're creating platforms that you can climb up or walk across or things like that to get where you need to go.
Yeah, that's a big part of us, because we want to have we want the game to feel like the games that we grew up with.
But just like you're actually there. That's pretty much the main thing we're going for. We want to recreate those experiences that we had when we were younger, but in the new medium of VR, so you feel like you're actually there doing it.
Makes sense. Right, so we are getting low on time, so just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Indeed. How is pricing going to work?
Right now it's $20, $19.99 on Steam. I think we plan on keeping it like that until we release more content, and then we might raise the price.
Yeah, we're undecided on that. That's a possibility, but it may end up just staying as $20 when we finally release.
Yeah, it really just depends on a number of factors.
Makes sense. Pretty typical early access pricing.
Yeah, it's very much in line with the competition and other games of the same genre. But like, it's pretty much $20 to $25 is what everybody charges.
And content.
Yeah, and we actually have more content than most of those games have or had when they entered early access.
Right. I'll see if my colleagues have any final questions here.
Sure.
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I mostly asked mine already about because I like a lot of fantasy settings, and sometimes it's hard to find things that sets them apart. But I guess it will be interesting to see a more interesting or a more in-depthly engineered for VR one, because that hasn't been done particularly well yet, I don't think.
Agreed.
No, Vanishing Realms did a pretty decent job, but it's super short, and I wasn't a fan of the combat. Also, didn't have magic or anything like that, so it's kind of limited.
Well, my questions have been answered, so I'm good.
All right then. So, yeah, I think we're good here. And once again, I'd like to thank both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and being with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No problem. Anyway, the game is Vengeful Rights. It is available on Steam Early Access for $20 if you have the proper equipment. Now, once again, you are going to need room scale capable VR to play this game.
Yes.
In fact, the Steam page notes that you do need the VR gear to actually play this. So
there's a demo as well. We should mention for if you just want to try it out, you could download and try it for free.
Okay.
So if you're so inclined, be sure to pick it up today. Petty Van, play us to the next segment. All right. Welcome to the topic of discussion. We are talking about Resident Evil 2 this week. Obviously, because
it's one of the Resident Evil games. I hear it might be the second.
Well, that and because the remake of Resident Evil 2 is close at hand. Like, I think that drops next week, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yep.
And indeed, you can play the one-shot demo right now on all of the platform it's getting released on. It's like and the one-shot demo has been getting a lot of praise. Now, Capcom seems to have hit it out of the park with the remake, but there's only so much we can talk about the remake since it's not out yet, and more to the point, that demo is only 30 minutes long.
Wow, it took this long for them to re-release a DualShock version? I'm kidding.
If I'm recalling correctly, they didn't need to do that with Resident Evil 2. Like, by that point, the DualShock was standard enough, where they could just have that, out the box. It's like when the first Resident Evil came out, it came out in '96. Before that, before the DualShock was even a thing.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling correctly. Anyway, yeah. So Resident Evil 2, probably one of the more important Resident Evil titles, all things told. Resident Evil. It's one of those sequels that greatly is expanded and established beyond the first game.
Because the first game was fairly small in concept. It's all inside the house, and sure, you kind of find out about a conspiracy, but
it's like, that's one of the first things that was done. They literally expanded the setting from just a mansion to the city at large. Granted, it's mostly around the police station. You could only do so much with PlayStation 1 technology, but it definitely feels like a much bigger game, because it is.
FMV dragged to poke your goddamn eye out.
Yes.
And then suddenly, all of a sudden, instantaneously, the translated English name made no sense. I'm joking, but yeah, this is a series I'm sure everybody knows that the Japanese name was different, and
yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how relevant Biohazard is to a lot of these. I don't play horror games, but
it's like the Biohazard name is still used, and
I know
the remake is being called Biohazard RE2 in Japan.
Right.
It's a play on words, the RE remake thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking the reason that they went with the name Resident Evil is because the first one was set in a house.
Yeah.
Anyway, also worth noting is this was one of the earlier works done by Hideki Kamina.
Yep.
Yeah, he
directed it.
Yeah, he was the director on this particular installment. And it's also worth noting that Resident Evil 2 was also the first Resident Evil that got radically reworked in development. Very famously, Resident Evil 2 was going to be very, very different to the released product. It's like what is now dubbed Resident Evil 1.5 was tossed aside, I believe, primarily because of quality concerns.
They eventually came to the decision that it was dissatisfactory, as well as apparently some creative differences at some points, I think.
Well, for example, Claire was very different.
She wasn't even Claire then; she was somebody else.
Yeah. Well, she was like an actual sidekick instead of a co-protagonist. She was supposed to be, how do I put this? Very spunky. Like it's just fucking horrible. It's like, I believe the Resident Evil 1.5 concept is out there now. As much as it could be, like, there is a playable version of that was rescued from the void, so to speak.
Yeah, fans have been trying to reconstruct as much of it as possible.
Yeah. I'm like, now the version we did get, it, it definitely keeps the core of Resident Evil. Like, Resident Evil didn't fundamentally change until like the fourth one.
Yeah.
Though I'm trying to think if this was the first one that had the 180-degree turn, or if that was Resident Evil 3.
That was 3.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Although Resident Evil 2 did have a very special control scheme that it is the first, a particular version of this game was the first to have non-tank controls. The Nintendo 64 version actually had an option for regular-ass controls.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I believe they called them 3D controls. However that worked, it's like, the thing is, this game is like, games of this era were kind of designed around tank controls.
Yeah.
It's like, the camera angles and all that stuff are, they're set up for that. So having the tank controls, while generally annoying, did match the play style.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that being said, I am not sad that the whole concept got reworked around Resident Evil 4.
Though, then
Anyway.
didn't it change again in, what was it, 5 or 6?
Not really. Like,
Mhm.
like the core mechanics are still fundamentally the same from Resident Evil 4. Like, Resident Evil, the big thing with Resident Evil 5 was co-op. I'm like,
Yeah.
but that's neither here nor there. Like, one of the big things about Resident Evil 2 was now the connected storyline. See, in the first one, Jill's story and Chris's story were separate. In this game, you can play either Leon or Claire's story, and then you can play the other ones to basically get the whole experience. And you can do it in either order. There's a lot more replay value here.
Yeah.
And it's also a big reason why the game came out on 2 discs. Like,
Yeah, because whichever one's story you play first, the other ones is going to be different.
Yeah.
On the same disc. I mean.
Yeah, and I think the setting is a big reason why this game is, in particular, is so beloved. Like, it's not just stepping out into a larger world. It's the police station was a fresher location than the mansion, even back then.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't really see a game do this kind of thing. Because Resident Evil's mansion was still following along the lines of Alone in the Dark.
Yeah, old abandoned mansion is like #1 default horror movie setting.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of like with Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. There's a lot. It's a lot more fresher take on that particular scenario.
That being said, yeah, the puzzles got even more ridiculous. Like, I'm still recalling, like, the door that's locked with chess pieces, and the lengths that they went to justify that.
Clearly, the most effective method of locking.
Well, it's like, no, seriously, they went and tried to justify why this is being locked by chess pieces, because the locksmith or the guard or whatever was an eccentric who really liked chess.
I mean, that's realistic enough for a certain value of realistic.
Indeed.
Yeah, you'll see it if this lasts long enough. You'll see that puzzle pretty soon here.
I guess what I mean by that is that if you really like chess, then sure, why not?
Yeah.
Make your locks chess-based.
But, like in terms of core mechanics and items and all that, it's actually pretty close to what Resident Evil 1 was doing. You still have the various guns, the various weapons and ammos. You have the various herbs. You still have the ink ribbons. Like
do you still have to? Well, you do still have to save at typewriters. Do you have to put items in boxes if you can't carry them and come back to them later?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
you still have to do that.
Yeah, it's like it's very much a Resident Evil game. Like and yeah, it's like if you do not like this kind of play style, this game probably isn't going to change your mind. Not in terms of its like controls, or anything like that, or its presentation. Because, like I said, it's doing that sequel balancing act. It is expanding and fleshing out the what it means to be Resident Evil without changing the core. And yeah, it's like that kind of thing pisses people off. Like there are still people to this day who can't stand Resident Evil 4 because they changed the tank controls. They didn't get rid of the tank controls. What they did was they futzed about with the camera. It's like so it was able to be more actiony, but still have the tank controls. Like but this isn't about Resident Evil.
I get the idea that tank controls are like sort of scarier in the sense that you can't control what you're doing as well, therefore you have to be more anxious about your surroundings, but
anyway, getting back to the game, the Resident Evil 2 game, this is also the introduction of other Resident Evil icons like Ada Wong. In terms of zombie enemies, this is the debut of the Licker. Probably one of the most infamous reveals in horror game history.
Yep.
Like so much so that like Capcom like recently released a video of the updated Licker scene. I haven't personally watched it. Like I'll probably pick up Resident Evil 2 at some point, but certainly not at launch. Don't really have the time for it. Let's see. This is also in terms of plotting. The Umbrella Corporation is still as dangerously stupid as ever. Let's see. Investing in what they call the G virus.
Yeah, the
not to be confused with the T virus or the. I'm sure there are other lettered viruses. I'm
honestly not exactly sure what the difference between the G virus and the T virus was, except, it was developed by like different people.
Yeah, about the only notable differences between the G virus and T virus is that the G virus is more about gives you regenerative abilities and something like.
Yes.
The point is still it's another virus that makes you zombies.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Paying attention to the deep lore of Resident Evil was never it's like never a highlight of mine, for obvious reasons. Because
its lore is about as confusing as Metal Gear Solid's.
Yeah, Resident Evil is a very, very dumb series.
It also uses it for slightly less fun stuff than Metal Gear Solid because you don't have guys with vampire powers like water walking and climbing up walls who are called vamp, not because of that, but because they're also like.
I don't think you are aware of how ridiculous that. Like, no, seriously.
I'm just saying, if you're using stuff to make people into zombies, even if they're really weird zombies.
Yeah, Resident Evil does that. It does. Like you missed out on Midget Napoleon.
Granted. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert
That
on
was
that.
hard.
I just am fond of Metal Gear Solid's particular brand of complete insanity.
Like I said, Resident Evil has that kind of complete insanity. They're not. It's just Resident Evil is far less pretentious.
Yeah, have you seen
Resi-
Albert Wesker in the later parts of the series?
Re-
That's how
Re-
ridiculous it gets.
like, Resident Evil doesn't pretend to be about great events or trying to say profound things.
Mhm.
At least not intentionally most of the time. I'm
Yeah,
like,
at least not stuff about like genetic superiority and stuff like that kind of popped up here every now and then, but that's about it.
it's usually unintentional
Yeah.
in terms of statements. Like, oh God. It's like if you want intelligence in your horror, that's what the Silent Hill series is for, at least the early games.
Yeah, at least early games.
Resident Evil.
Later on, it's
Resident Evil has actually been pretty consistent in its stupidity.
yeah.
It's like it just got more and more amplified.
Yeah, just got
time on, but Resident Evil 2, it's still, I don't know. I don't want to say grounded, but you can still recognize it's Night of the Living Dead roots.
indeed.
As opposed to the fucking circus that was like Resident Evil 6.
Or it kind of became closer to like the Resident Evil movies. Oh God.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Like, and also worth noting is this one came out on a lot of platforms.
Well, it came out on PlayStation twice.
No, you're thinking of the original Resident Evil, which actually came out on the PlayStation about 3 times. Resident Evil 2, there may have been a few differences in like the player's choice version, but no, I'm talking more about like Resident Evil 2 improbably got ported to the Nintendo 64.
Not sure how they pulled that off, but they did it.
It is considered sorcery to some degree.
Well, it's like I do know how they pulled it off. Extreme compression.
Yep.
The game was ported by a company called Angel Studios, who you might know better now as Rockstar San Diego.
And if we need to explain who those are, go use Google. But trust me, it won't take long.
Well, anyway, yeah, so Angel Studios had some pretty impressive compression technology. It had to be because, they did manage to get a 2-disc PlayStation game onto the Nintendo 64 relatively unscathed. I say relatively because, there's no getting around the fact that the Nintendo 64 on a technical level is the inferior version because, when you're dealing with this level of compression, the audio suffers, for example.
Yeah.
That's its most notable part of the port is the audio is not quite as good.
It's like the Digital Foundry did a very in-depth breakdown of the technical aspects.
Yeah, it's funny. 64 power-wise could just run circles around the PS1, but because they chose to go with small cartridges, things got gimped hard.
They have better theoretical visual stuff, but they just don't have as many areas or volume of stuff that it can hold.
Yeah, hell, even it had a better sound chip, but because there was no room for CD audio.
I'm like, no, the Nintendo 64 sound capabilities were pretty piss poor. It did not have a sound chip.
Mm.
Mm-mm.
I'm um, like, and it's also graphical capabilities are not just power. It's about architecture. It's about the tools that are contained. You know, for example, the Nintendo 64 had built-in anti-aliasing. The PlayStation did not. That is why the PlayStation has the JAGs that stab your eyes, and that is why the N64 has the Vaseline that blurs your eyes. This 3D shit did not age well.
Well, the thing we're finding out now with the 64 is if you actually tap the RGB out, the Vaseline isn't there anymore. It's purely the noise from the component cables. If you get rid of that, it's actually really good.
Right, but you know, this is back in the day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like how many, like, you have to mod the N64 to do that shit.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, yeah, this game got ported to multiple systems. The Impossible N64 port, the Dreamcast version, probably the definitive version of the game is on the GameCube. There's also a PC version which isn't available on any digital storefront. I don't know the particulars around that.
Isn't it something to do with rights on something?
Possibly, like,
I think it was like licensed music or something like that.
could be. It could be a coding issue. It could. There's all sorts of rights things on old games that prevent them from showing up. It's just, or it could be compatibility issues. Like-
Maybe.
Also, let's not forget about the Gamecom version.
I'm like,
I'm gonna go drink some
I'd
bleach.
forgotten about the Gamecom,
Some memories are best left
and I'm about
repressed.
to forget about it again.
The hard way gets a ball peen hammer.
yeah, Resident Evil 2 is another was also had mini games, kind of like.
Mhm.
Weren't mercenaries or anything, but the Fourth Survivor and the Tofu Survivor, and they will be in the remake. Like, Capcom just showed off screenshots of the Fourth Survivor and Tofu.
All hail
Yeah, they showed
tofu.
Yeah, they showed up in the trailer after the demo finishes as well.
Like, and there was apparently a third mini game, but I played the PlayStation 2. I played the PlayStation version of this, so never played the Extreme Battle. No. Also, worth noting, the N64 had an EX mode where it had documents from various Resident Evil games, not just the second one. It had some documents from Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil, and some stuff from Resident Evil 3, filling in the blanks of the story. You know, in case you are one of the weird people who actually give a shit about the Resident Evil story.
Mhm.
Like, I know there are people who are fans of this lore. They confound me because this series is just so unrelentingly stupid that I just cannot invest in it.
Yeah, I never really tried very hard to invest in it either.
Like-
Every time I look up anything on the lore, it's just like, what?
It's a great horror series. It's an iconic one, but you know, it's never really been able to strip away from its B horror roots.
Indeed.
You know, probably
That's also its charm.
yeah, it's like probably for the best, because
Indeed, yeah.
at least until like Resident Evil 7, which is about as radical a departure as like Resident Evil 4 was, because
Mhm.
you know
A departure in sort of the other direction.
yeah, well, it's like Resident Evil 7 is a back to basics kind of affair, and
it had been getting more and more actiony, and then that one was like, hey, wasn't this supposed to be like a horror game? Let's do some horror in the game.
well, and it's actually able to take itself fairly seriously because it kind of divests itself from a lot of the Resident Evil trappings. Like, it's the most un-Resident Evil out there, if that makes sense. And in terms of the remake, well, it's being built in the style of like the modern day Resident Evil games outside of 7.
Mhm. Closer to 4.
Yeah. And as far as it looks like it's going to pan out, given the demo impressions, which is good.
Mhm.
I'm like, as far as what they do after the Resident Evil 2 remake, we'll have to see. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do wish I could have asked more about the particulars of Resident Evil 2, but it has been a fucking age and a half since I played the old game, and I do not have access to a PlayStation 1 or anything like that. It's like I don't have any old systems, except for like the ones that are in fucking storage. So my memories are kind of faded. Not gonna lie, but I do know and remember enough. Resident Evil 2. A good game of the age, but it's probably really, really good that it's getting the modern update because, sorry, fuck tank controls.
Yeah. I really don't have the most fond of memories of them. As much as I love the series.
And you do not need shitty controls to make a game scary.
Oh no, I never actually said you did.
No, but people have used that just to,
it can make it a little bit more tense, but the way I think about that is not as a like something to put into a game so much as a way to use a limitation that you're facing because of how you can handle the control. Like, it was a good thing when they realized that was the best control scheme that they could come up with to use it to like increase tension, but there are other ways to increase tension.
Well, it's also just something that doesn't hold water anymore, because the reason why tank controls exist was because the fixed perspectives, because they were using pre-rendered backgrounds in the PlayStation 1 era.
Right, that's what I meant by like using the limitations.
Well, and didn't the first one not have the DualShock wasn't out yet?
Yes, that as well. It had to deal with the D-pad. So everything was born out of the limitations of like 1996. It's just that shit stuck around way longer than it should have. Like going up to like until Resident Evil 4. It's like.
Which by that point, visuals have. By that point, visuals have gotten good enough to where the tank controls weren't really necessary to help induce horror anymore.
Right. Well, more to the point, they could come up with environments that didn't require tank controls to navigate, and they came up with other ways to manipulate the emotions.
Anyway, I think that's about it for Resident Evil 2 and indeed this week's installments. So the week ahead. Let's see. We do not have anything slated for Friday this week. And as far as games reviews, This week we will be covering The Castle of No Escape 2. It's a roguelike, real-time roguelike adventure game in an 8-bit style. Surprisingly fun. Like, enjoyed a lot of roguelikes I've played in recent years. And a game, I think it's called IO. I think it's going for input-output, but it doesn't have the slash in between it. This is a physics puzzle game, and the main gimmick is your, for lack of a better term, your wheel.
Yeah, you play as a wheel. You can't jump, but you can grow or shrink.
And you use that gimmick to get to the exits. It's a decent puzzle game. More on that in the full review. And yeah, until Sunday, I shall wish you good gaming.